Hi, I'm David Whitman, the author of the new book, The Profits of Failure, For-Profit Colleges and the Closing of the Conservative Mind. I want to thank VES, Veterans Education Success, for sponsoring this webinar today. And I want to express my gratitude to Arti Swaminathan of Yahoo Finance for moderating the discussion today, and to our veterans and our panelists who are going to talk about their own experiences with for-profit colleges. I'm going to talk for a few minutes to open about the history of federal regulation and abuses in the for-profit sector, dating back to the World War II GI Bill. And if you have questions that you would like to direct to me or panelists, feel free to post those in the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar. Now, there are lots of folks listening today who are well-versed on for-profit colleges, but I want to start by briefly talking to those of you who are not experts. And I think an obvious question to begin with is this: why is the eye-glazing subject of the history of for-profit college regulation not only important, but surprising? Most Americans know little or nothing about for-profit colleges. In part, that's because the for-profit sector has long been the Rodney Dangerfield of higher education. It just can't get no respect. Parents may dream of sending their child to an Ivy League college, the flagship research university in their home state, maybe their alma mater, but they don't dream of sending their child to a for-profit university. In 2020, just 1 in 3 Americans thought that for-profit colleges are, quote, for people like me. Those popular prejudices, in my view, are both mistaken and short-sighted, because the fate of for-profit colleges and how the government chooses to regulate them is surprisingly consequential for millions of Americans. Each year, good for-profit colleges successfully train tens of thousands of students to take jobs as medical assistants, cosmetologists, business administrators, registered nurses, HVAC technicians. These are jobs that can change the trajectory of students and their families for years to come. But each year, bad for-profit colleges leave hundreds of thousands of students with no job and steep debts, and they can ruin or mar the lives of students and their families for years to come. And because career colleges are heavily subsidized by the federal government through the federal student aid program, government regulation of for-profit institutions helps determine the return and effectiveness of tens of billions of taxpayer dollars. So, like it or not, everyone on this webinar is helping to fund for-profit colleges and the more than 1 million students who attend them today. Now, this public ignorance and indifference to for-profit colleges is compounded by the fact that the adults who attend them are among America's most vulnerable and neglected students. They're single moms, low-income adults, veterans, minority students, and displaced workers. About 160,000 veterans used $1.3 billion in GI Bill benefits at for-profit schools in 2017. These students, as we'll hear from our panelists later, are doing all the right things. They are enrolling in for-profit colleges to get new and better paid jobs, and they are trying to improve their lives and those of their family. These are the very students, the vulnerable consumers that government and society should place a priority on protecting, and from racking up unaffordable debt for a worthless degree or certificate. And since the majority of students at for-profit colleges are Black or Hispanic, how students fare at for-profit colleges is very much a test both of social justice and of racial equity. Now that's why taxpayers, that's why the person in the street should care about for-profit colleges. Now, before turning to the book, I want to just add a brief personal note. During the nearly 6 years that I was a speechwriter for Secretary of Education Arne Duncan in the Obama administration, I wrote about many subjects for Arnie, but for-profit colleges was not among them. And yet I watched the regulatory debates about for-profit schools from a distance with keen interest for a couple of reasons. I started my career as a journalist at U.S. News and World Report way back when, in 1985, during the second term of Ronald Reagan. I covered social policy, and I had interviewed Reagan's Secretary of Education, Bill Bennett. I knew that Bill Bennett was a ferocious critic of for-profit schools. So when the Obama administration started regulating these career education schools, I was surprised that many conservatives and even many reporters had completely forgotten Republicans' traditional support for accountability measures at for-profit schools. There was one other, more personal reason I kept tabs from a distance on regulation of the for-profit sector. As part of a mid-career transition out of journalism before I went to the department, I had enrolled in a for-profit massage therapy school. I earned my certificate, I got licensed and certified, and I worked part-time as a therapist at an area spa. I had a good experience at my massage therapy school, and so I knew firsthand the virtues of a good for-profit school. So with all of that as an introduction, I want to take a few minutes to lay out three themes of my book. The first of those overarching patterns of history is that federal regulation of for-profit schools consistently follows the same identical cycle. And this cycle is driven by the federal government making new dollars, new pots of money available to for-profit schools, which spurs abuses and propels the need for new regulation and law to strengthen consumer protections. This historical cycle occurred in the 1940s after the passage of the World War II GI Bill. It took place again in the mid-1970s, the latter half of the 1980s, the early 1990s, and from about 2006 up until today. The second overarching pattern of history is that abuses not only reappear on a cyclical basis, but are all too common in the for-profit sector. It's a myth that the problems of the sector just stem from a few bad apples. The problem is much deeper and more widespread. And finally, the third pattern is that bad for-profit schools have consistently created a terrible and tragic human toll. They leave so many students saddled with unaffordable debts for decades and sometimes for a lifetime. Now, in thinking about this cycle of scandal and abuses, it's worth remembering that from 1945 up until about 1970, federal aid to go to for-profit schools was basically limited to veterans. And many people think of the World War II GI Bill as landmark legislation, and in many ways it was. My dad went to law school on the World War II GI Bill. But contrary to popular lore, the educational component of the GI Bill wasn't just about sending GIs en masse to college. Here's a surprising fact. More GIs use their educational benefits to attend for-profit trade schools that enrolled in four-year colleges and universities. In 1948, Collier's magazine reported that the educational provisions of the GI Bill had, quote, squandered at least $500 million, supporting what proved in many instances, and I quote, to be the greatest boondoggle of all time. Veterans were using their GI Bill benefits to become amateur piccolo players, horseback riders, and to learn the fine art of chicken sexing so they could distinguish male and female chicks. A week after the Collier's article appeared, Homer Ramey, a Republican congressman from Ohio, wrote his own article for Collier's, and he complained that for-profit owners had established new schools that, quote, milked the federal treasury of the taxpayers' funds without giving any worthwhile return. The GAO estimated that by 1951, only 20% of the 1.67 million vets who attended for-profit schools had even completed their courses, and a much smaller number had found gainful employment in their field of training. So for the next 70 years, scandals at for-profit schools were the gift that kept on giving to investigative reporters, from Carl Bernstein at the Washington Post to the Boston Globe's famous Spotlight team, and all the way down to Stars and Stripes. Let me give you a couple of examples of the cycle of abuses repeating themselves. In the Obama administration, two giant for-profit chains closed abruptly. One was Corinthian Colleges, and the other was ITT Technical Institute. The closure of 130 ITT campuses in mid-semester left some 35,000 students in the lurch. The Attorney General of Massachusetts, Maura Healey, sued ITT for allegedly using harassing sales tactics and misleading students about the job placement rates of its computer network system training program at two ITT campuses in Massachusetts. But as it turns out, more than 40 years earlier, ITT had faced very similar complaints in Massachusetts. The Boston Globe Spotlight team reported in 1974 that ITT had been using, quote, misleading advertising and a highly deceptive sales force. It has a demonstrably dismal record of training students for careers in their field of study. Predatory recruiting practices by ITT included sending phony telegrams to 17,000 individuals in ghetto neighborhoods in the Boston area, falsely informing them that they had been selected to take a test at ITT for a special scholarship program. One Globe reporter actually applied to be a salesman for ITT and learned that the director of marketing spurred on his salespeople with this motto: get the asses in the classes. And I've barely scratched the surface about outrageous recruiting abuses over the last 75 years. For-profit schools have recruited and enrolled individuals at homeless shelters, halfway houses for institutionalized mental patients, county jails, drug rehab centers, public housing projects, welfare offices that cater to seasonal migratory farm workers, and servicemen at overseas Army barracks, including signing up veterans with traumatic brain injuries who didn't know what course they were taking. Perhaps the biggest outrage was what was known as Greyhound therapy. In 1989, the Houston Chronicle discovered that two local for-profit schools were busing the homeless from shelters in Dallas, San Antonio, and New Orleans to Houston to sign them up for student aid. While on the bus, the homeless men and women signed their student loan promissory notes. When they got to Houston, the school dumped the homeless back into shelters and cheap hotels until the schools received their loan money. So you can't read the history of regulation and scandal and walk away thinking that the problems of the sector are just the problems of a rare bad apple. Consistently, there are three big problems that are far more common in the for-profit sector than elsewhere in higher education. First, for-profit schools are far more likely than other schools to close abruptly, leaving their students stranded midstream in their studies and often with no other program to which they can transfer. Second, they are far more likely to engage in deceptive advertising, boiler room recruiting tactics, and fraudulent misrepresentation. And finally, they are far more likely to leave their students saddled with unaffordable debt for worthless degrees. So I want to close by talking about that last recurring problem, the burden of unaffordable debt. The problem of student debt is widely misunderstood. For most students, student loans help provide access to college, and the vast majority of borrowers repay their loans. In news accounts, you'll often read about students who owe more than $100,000 or $150,000 in loans. But many of those students are grad students who are going to go on to well-paid careers as doctors and lawyers and engineers. The critical problem of student debt is not debt per se, or even the amount of debt. The critical problem is unaffordable debt. Debts that students can't repay from the jobs they land after they graduate and have no prospect of being able to realistically repay, forcing them to default on their loans. Now, the problem of unaffordable debt is concentrated in the for-profit sector, particularly among Black students and low-income students. And it's the burden of unaffordable debt that day after day, year after year, decade after decade, that takes a terrible toll. Debt and defaults on student loans are rarely forgiven. Defaulting on a student loan can ruin an individual's credit rating for decades and sometimes for a lifetime, make it difficult to buy a car, hold a job, or buy a house. It's also extremely difficult to discharge student loan debt. Since 1998, borrowers have been barred from discharging student loan debt, even in bankruptcy, unlike nearly all other forms of debt. There are statutes of limitations for many crimes and misdemeanors, but not for the collection of student loans. Even temporary deferments of loan payments are difficult to obtain in a health crisis. Until 2019, a borrower who contracted cancer could not defer loan payments during their treatment and chemotherapy. So the professional consequences of defaulting on a student loan can be devastating. If an active duty service member using Defense Department or GI Bill educational benefits defaults on a student loan, they can lose their security clearance and they can be discharged from the military. The relentless psychological burden of paying down debt for a worthless degree was best summed up for me by 43-year-old Holly Dumas. She was pursuing a nursing degree at for-profit Harrison College in Indianapolis while she cared for her elderly mother and a disabled husband with a traumatic brain injury. In 2018, Harrison College closed abruptly mid-semester. In the aftermath of that disastrous closure, Holly told the Chronicle of Higher Education, quote, "Every day I get on Facebook and I hope and pray that someone I go to school with hasn't killed themselves, because that's how devastating this has been for all of us." So my book is dedicated to all of the Hollies at for-profit schools, the students who did all the right things but got bad career education at schools that left them with worthless degrees and unaffordable debt. We can never forget that behind the history of for-profit schools, beyond the political battles over regulation, there are hundreds of thousands of Americans each year who for-profit schools, sadly, are failing. Higher education should lead students out of poverty, not into it. And anything less is economically unsustainable and morally unacceptable. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from veterans and students today. I'm looking forward to hearing their stories so we can learn about the very personal and large stakes in a debate that sometimes seems abstract and remote. And now I'm going to turn this over to R.T. Swaminathan of Yahoo Finance, our outstanding moderator.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is R.T. Swaminathan. I am a reporter with Yahoo Finance. I cover higher education, and I have written about for-profit schools and some accountability issues that I have seen. And of course, David has also picked up in his book. Book, by the way, was excellent. So we'll be speaking with him for a short while before turning to hear from some former students. But first of all, David, it's really nice to hear you and listen to your presentation. I wanted to tell you something that happened a couple of days ago. I heard an ad on Spotify, the streaming platform for a for-profit school that told me they had $1 million in grants to give away if I were to sign up for a degree. My point is, how has the pandemic changed this environment with federal aid coming in, the CARES money coming in? What has changed with this specific period of time?
Well, the for-profit sector typically grows during a recession, sometimes very dramatically, like it did in 2007, 2008. Because when unemployment is high, people look to go back to school and get trained for new jobs. And because of the pandemic and the constraints on in-person learning, millions of Americans have turned to online instruction in ways that they might not have had before. And that's an area where for-profit schools specialize. They really pioneered all of those large sort of online universities. So when a recession like this comes along, for-profit schools have a powerful incentive to get more revenues, get more students in with federal student loan aid. So they're out there marketing like crazy during a recession. And the risk, of course, is that what happened in the last recession was that they were just getting students in and getting them on federal student aid, but the students were not ready for college work. And so they were getting tons and tons of students who were dropping out and getting stuck with student loan debt, but not getting a good education. I think we're seeing some troubling warning signs about this. The for-profit sector is the only post-secondary sector where enrollment grew during the pandemic. Enrollment is way down at community colleges, which are traditionally the for-profit sector's main competitors. And the CARES Act, which dispersed federal aid based in part on the school's number of full-time students who have Pell Grants or sort of Pell scholarships, basically, that disproportionately rewarded for-profit schools. So it may be a little early to know whether we're going to see a return of abuses or not, but the warning signs are out there that it could happen.
So from your research, it seems like for-profits also tend to focus in on veterans because of the benefits that come with them. You've spoken extensively about this. So why are we having problems fixing this? Why do existing bills, why do they not go far enough? What is the snag?
I think there's two reasons. First, we've sort of misdiagnosed the problem for decades as being due to a few bad apples. And second, I think the for-profit lobby is very politically powerful and repeatedly has killed off meaningful efforts to prevent abuses and sanction low-value institutions. It's true there's an occasional shyster or huckster in the for-profit sector, but the problem generally isn't that for-profit owners are corrupt or greedy profiteers. I think that many for-profit owners and executives are well-intentioned. They want to provide an education, but they also want to make a profit at the same time. And the pressure to make a profit, to show rapid enrollment growth, it leads them to cut corners in providing a quality education. You spend more on marketing to attract more students, but you cut back spending on instruction. You get more revenues by enrolling more students, even those who are clearly unprepared for college, and they're going to drop out of their programs. So what I think, to stop the problem from happening, to stop the cycle from reoccurring, I think what lawmakers and federal regulators need to do is to change that perverse incentive to shortchange students. And that's hard to do, particularly in the face of this powerful political lobby that's trying to defend the current system. There's a for-profit college in almost every congressional district in the country. And the for-profit industry is among the biggest corporate spenders in congressional races. So you just don't find any lawmakers who are willing to go up against you don't find many who are willing to go up against powerful schools and business interests in their own districts.
Just one last quick one. So before, in the before times, the Reagan administration took a hard stance against for-profit schools. Republicans were historically against for-profit schools, but there was a hearing today where clearly that was not the case. The roles have shifted. Just quickly tell us how can we sort of reverse this or bring both sides together to look at the effects, the negative effects of the bad for-profit schools. I'm acknowledging that there are some good ones, but how can we bring both of these groups to the table to address this?
Well, I guess knowing something about history helps. Knowing that this has been bipartisan at times, and that it doesn't have to be a partisan issue. I think it's ironic that Secretary Betsy DeVos in the Trump administration claimed repeatedly that every decision she made in higher education was guided by what was best for students. And in the for-profit sector, she essentially eliminated or eviscerated the two important Obama administration rules for career schools. The first was the gainful employment rule, which set a minimum performance standard that career programs had to meet for receiving federal aid. And then she also eviscerated the borrower defense rule, which enabled students who had been defrauded to get their loans forgiven. As far as I know, not a single student, not one, and tens of thousands of people commented on these rules, asked Betsy DeVos to eliminate those two rules, which protected students from bad for-profit schools. And this comes at a terrible human cost. We were talking about this a little bit earlier before everyone got on, but Secretary DeVos put an 18-month hold at one point on processing borrower defense claims from defrauded students. And these were students who were desperate for relief, who had been waited years to get their loans forgiven. So by November 2019, the department was sitting on 290,000 borrower defense claims. I think you were telling me it's up to 300,000 now, which was equivalent to having every college student in the University of California system file a fraud claim for loan forgiveness. So take one of the stories that you're going to hear today from students and multiply it by 290,000 stories, and you have some idea of the scale of suffering that has been imposed on students.
On that note, thank you, David, for your insights. And now we turn to the panel of former students who have a lot of experience at these schools. I'd first like to introduce Tasha Burkhalter, a U.S. Army veteran who attended ITT Technical Institute. We also have Jessica Muscari, who attended the Illinois Institute of Art. And we also have, I believe, I saw him, Kendrick Harrison, who is also an Army veteran who attended Argosy University. So welcome all, Tasha, Kendrick, and Jessie. We're going to have you share your personal story of your experience. And why don't we start with Tasha first?
Hello, my name is Tasha Burkhalter. I am a veteran of the United States Army, served 5 years, got out, wanted to go back to school as I got pulled while I was in the Army serving because of Iraqi freedom. So I wanted to continue and further my education. Saw these ads for this great school, ITT Tech, as David talked about earlier. Thought it would be really good, hands-on training, top of the art, state-of-the-art labs and forensic things. So I went ahead. I went one time for a visit and they never left me alone. Like I wasn't even able to go look at other schools. It was just like a nonstop, I guess you could say like a harassment. So I went ahead and went back, and before I knew it, I had signed and I was going to school. Started off fairly good as a freshman. Towards the end of that year, I started to notice things weren't right. Labs were not what they were described to be. I got a forensic kit that literally was a fingerprint kit that you probably could have bought at Walmart. I paid like $700 for it. It just wasn't, it was nothing that it perceived to be. The teachers were working in the fields, but weren't necessarily certified teachers or professors. I had a lot of cops for teachers. I had a lot of lawyers for teachers. So moving forward, graduated in 2010. I'm now married. We have 4 children, one on the way in November, and I am sitting at almost $100,000 in debt of student loans that I will probably never be able to pay off. This has really damaged my credit. I can't purchase a home. I can't use any of my VA benefits. It's a struggle. I mean, I've had therapy and things like, it's just really hard on you as a person. You think that, oh, I was in the service and I wanted to better my life, and you get out and you want to continue that and go from, active duty to civilian. And that's a hard transition. And then when you get taken for granted, it's like I still had a target on my back. And that was hard to swallow. So I'm just kind of taking it day by day. I've been to DC. I've spoke at a press conference with Schumer in Durban. That was a great experience. Still working with Raymond and VES. They've all been amazing. But my borrowers defense application has been pending for almost 2 years now. So I don't even know if it's a go, if it's not. I'm just still waiting to hear about that. So if there is anything that anyone could do to help us veterans get away from these nonprofit schools and help us get our lives back, it really does take your life. You have dreams and goals, and there's things that you set, that you want in your life at a certain age or a certain time period, and things you want for your children, that you never, maybe you didn't have growing up, or you just wanted to give your children a better life. And it's hard to do that when you have that hanging over your head. And, I'm fairly a believer in God, and I trust him in all things. And it's just really hard sometimes to look at the natural and, still have that faith, but that is what I definitely hang on to. So I'm hoping maybe President Biden can step in and maybe do something and help us out and just make things better and do better. They're the ones approving these schools, so just right the wrong.
Thank you, Tasha, for sharing your story, and very excited for November. Congratulations. I would now like to also turn to Jessica Muscari for her basically 5 minutes on what happened with her experience. Jessica?
Hi, my name's Jessie. I attended the Illinois Institute of Art in the Chicago location in April of 2015 until I graduated in September 2018. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in honors in illustration and design. About 8 months prior to my graduation, we were informed as a student body that our school was going to be making a sale from a nonprofit to a for-profit organization, but that this was going to be a great thing. It was going to help propel the school into the future. So, we believed them. They threw us pizza parties and ice cream parties with the president, trying to encourage us into believing that we don't need to worry about anything and we don't need to do this further research. It was just all going to be great. So, and also with the sale that unfortunately our ceremonies for graduation was going to be going from 2 times a year to once a year after summer quarter. So, since I was graduating in the fall after our summer quarter, I had asked to walk early, and I had gotten approval for that request as long as I signed documentation to return to my last 11 weeks after our graduation ceremony. So after the graduation ceremony, we had our little 2-week break before the fall semester that And I returned. Upon my return, I saw a lot of my student peers and even some of my professors in a state of distraught. And being the first day of school, for many of them, I was like, well, this is an odd type of behavior to be having on our first day of school. What's going on here? So at that point, it was some of my student classmates informed me that we had lost our accreditation in December of 2018. And they were just now informing us of this loss in May, no, not May, sorry, in July of 2018. And that all of the new students, as well as graduating students, would not be attaining an accredited degree. So my first thing was, okay, so obviously my degree is affected by this. And obviously everybody that just graduated from December to now is affected by this, and they don't even know because they're not attending school anymore. So I hopped on Facebook and let all of my fellow student classmates know what was going on so that they can start on the informative, as well as gathered a lot of fellow classmates that were still in school signatures. I got a spot with the representative of Senator Durbin in his office, and he took our presence and we went to him and presented our case. And then we were able to find a lawyer and start a class action lawsuit. But unfortunately, that class action lawsuit is still going on today. The school has went into arbitration. They're trying for a cease and desist. And we are actually now fighting a cease and desist with them. And the only part of the case we have won so far is getting students' loans dropped from the accreditation loss until the closure of the school of 2018, December of 2018. So I attended 4 years of what I thought was a great school. I enjoyed my education. My professors were amazing and wonderful people and taught me a lot. And I committed 4 hard years of doing this education, only to find out at my last 11 weeks of it that the last 6 months of it was not worth anything. And for that, my whole 4 years of education ended up being not for anything.
Thank you, Jessie, for sharing your story. One common thread between the two of you is both you and Tasha have started doing advocacy work to make sure that you get recognition for this big issue that you had to deal with, and also trying to find a way to fix it, right? And the other thing is the role of lawmakers in sort of helping your cause. Both of you mentioned Senator Durbin. I think Tasha mentioned Senator Chuck Schumer as well. So I want to turn to Kendrick, last but not least, to share his story and his experience. Go ahead, Kendrick.
Okay, can you guys hear me now? Okay, awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Kendrick Harrison. I'm a military veteran, an entrepreneur, and a father of 4. I'm also a former Argosy University student. Prior to deciding to pursue my college degree, I was a highly decorated military veteran. I joined the military when I was 17 years old, and I was shortly shipped out after my 18th birthday. From there, I spent a year in Korea and then off to Fort Lewis, where I was deployed to Iraq. Going back to college had always been a dream of mine. It just seemed like prior to 2016, I never really had the time, the ability, or the fundage to do it. I always had my GI Bill, but it just seemed out of reach. For the longest time, I believed that I had traded my college education for my military service. So I just thought I just forgoed it, and I would take my military service and continue on that way. I started my quest for my college degree on the internet in 2016, and I quickly found a university called Argosy. Unfortunately for me, this is where the nightmare of my dealings with Dream Center education begins. For those that don't know, Argosy University was a university purchased by Dream Center Education Holdings in 2016, I believe. It's one of the many for-profit colleges that closed in 2019 in the surrounding years, leaving students buried in financial debt and hardship. For the past several months before its closing, Argosy violated their own financial aid stipend return policy, as well as robbed and cheated military veterans and students out of almost $16 million. Unfortunately, I'm one of those military veterans that have been robbed and cheated. Argosy University still has illegally stolen over $15,000 from me and my family. And since then, my life has been in a great deal of turmoil and financial hardship. As a direct result of Argosy University and Dream Center Education's actions, my family and I were evicted. We were made homeless. My credit score dropped over 100 points. My car and my daughter's car was repossessed. Honestly, still to this day, I'm still dealing with the fallout from the actions of Dream Center and Argosy. I mean, I can still remember when education was viewed as a symbol of wealth and stability in America. To have a highly educated population was a cornerstone of our great country. One day soon, we will all have to decide what America we're going to leave to our children. The America that I fought and was willing to die for was a land of the free and the home of the brave. I was only 17 when I volunteered to join the military. I was courageous when I was ordered to go to war. The only thing that I ask now is that our leaders in government defend our citizens just as courageously when they take up these issues and fight against corporations like Dream Center that take advantage of our veterans. One good quote I like to leave the panel with is that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. I believe that couldn't be farther from the truth than what's going on with this panel, what David's doing, shedding light on the topic here and really getting the word out. The things that VES and IAVA are doing, the initiatives that they're pushing and the things that they're fighting for veterans, they actually help real people. These initiatives, these laws, this legislation that they're asking to be passed, things like the 90-10 loophole, which is great, but we still have 2 years still left on the table where they can still take advantage of veterans like myself. I mean, these things that we shouldn't allow loopholes like this. These things actually hurt and injure families like mine. They cause irreparable damage. I mean, like I said, I'm still dealing with the fallout from 2019 in 2021, and I'm still trying to make myself whole. With things like what Betsy DeVos did when she rewrote the borrower's defense, I mean, it really removed the ability to go after those schools when they do things like this. And then there's real damages and real injuries to people like myself. I mean, this is again, like we've covered today, it's a nonpartisan issue. This is an American issue. These are not just Democrats or just Republicans that are getting taken advantage of in this situation. These are everyday Americans. And it hurts the American strength and our democracy. Educated population allows us to lead in areas like innovation and in medical. I mean, personally myself, I was going for I was doing a double major. I was going for my business degree as well as my psychology degree. So again, having an educated businessman and an educated psychologist helps the population as a whole. You know, when colleges do things like this, I mean, it hurts the community at large.
I wasn't sure if you were done, but Kendrick, that was really, really powerful, and just speaks to, we have to keep reminding people that some of these schools are doing some really shady things, and we need to keep the pressure on, right? So at this point, I'd now like to welcome back author and expert David Whitman back into our chat for a very brief conversation together on what we've learned. So I want to start with Tasha, and then maybe Kendrick, you can jump in. But can you tell us a little bit more about the marketing and the recruiting? I think Tasha said it was just too easy to get in, but also so difficult, like almost harassment to get away from the school. Did you get a feeling that the both of you, they were targeting you because of your veteran status? And can you just explain a little bit more about that process?
I know in my circumstance, I was excited to go back to school. I mean, I was young, I was like 23, and I just thought, hey, this is a very enthusiastic school. I didn't really start getting on edge about anything until like my veteran status and my GI Bill was a constant conversation. It was constantly brought up and dissected. And then I actually got a bonus on top of my GI Bill because of the time that I came in and because of my MOS, my job. So I actually had $75,000 for college, and they took all of it. I have absolutely none of it, and I still have $100,000 in loans. So they recruited me, and when I came in, it was like so many promises and we're going to make sure that you get job placement after graduation. It was just so much that they offered, and me as a veteran, I'm thinking, okay, this is just how it works. Nobody really explained the process of, transitioning or going to college. So, I'm just trying to figure it out on my own. And this being a government approved facility, a school that, I knew worked with veterans, I didn't expect for them to take advantage of me. I didn't expect them to lie and make things, bigger than what it was, or make it seem like, something that it wasn't. So I trusted them. I did. I trusted in what they said. I trusted the loan paperwork, the contracts. I trusted everything that they said. And then because I also went with a few other veterans, when we started questioning things, we were always given the runaround. Nobody can answer anything. We were always getting referred to other offices or other, people to talk to. And the next thing we know, teachers start quitting and start leaving. And I'm like, okay, something's not right. And then I graduate, and my degree, my first big job that I go out for, they hired me on the spot. And before I could even go to the parking lot, they called me back and said, well, I'm sorry, but your degree is not accepted. It's not recognized by the Department of Education. I'm like, well, isn't the Department of Education the one that approved the school? So it just really took me back. Like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I just wasted 4 years and all this money to go to this great facility that everybody is, the commercials were, I seemed like I saw an ITT commercial every 3 or 4 commercials. I mean, it was just always ITT. There's always borders and big signs and stuff about ITT. So I'm just thinking, this is a top of the line school, and it ended up ruining my life.
If I could elaborate on that a little bit, as far as for me as a veteran, I felt that it was very predatory, especially for veterans, which is why I spoke about the 90-10 loophole. Because for me, from start to finish, it was like one of the very first questions: how do you plan on paying for college? And I was like, well, I have my GI Bill. I'm a military veteran. Oh, okay. And then from that point on, it was like full court press. Hey, let's get your GI Bill in there. Let's get your the form that the VA sends you that says that you're eligible for these benefits. And then and I thought that would be good. I thought when I signed up, hey, you know what? I've got my GI Bill. That's all I should need for college. And Argosy, that wasn't good enough for them. They said, well, yeah, you know what? And again, like I definitely agree with my other panelist. She said they would very easily smooth things out. Oh, no, don't worry. This is just this. It's a formality. Me being a first generation student, I didn't know any of this information. So when they told me to fill out my FAFSA, have you talked to FAFSA yet? And I was like, huh? Who is FAFSA? I didn't even know FAFSA was the education, industry that you would get loans from. So they had to explain that to me. And even through the loan process, they walked me through it. Like we're here now on the Zoom, and they're like, oh, let me see your screen. Click this, okay? Click that, and click this, and click that. And before I knew it, I was signed up for the works. I mean, I had unsubsidized loans, subsidized loans. They had took out my Pell Grants, my GI Bill. And one thing that I want to really elaborate on with veterans is just extremely damaging, because although we're talking about student loans and student loan debt that can be erased or forgiven, we're not talking about the veteran's plight, because as a veteran, those are benefits that are earned. And there's not a loan forgiveness for benefits that we can get those back. So for me, 95% of my GI Bill has been gobbled up by Argosy with no degree. The credits that I got from there are not transferable. I was 3 months from graduation when Argosy closed their doors. So that's pretty much a degree with my GI Bill would cover, which now I don't have, and there's no recourse for that. So yeah, we can erase the student loan debt, but what about my earned benefits that I earned on the battlefield? I mean, those are just taken by this company, and no one's batting an eye. And I'm not alone. These are hundreds and thousands of other veterans that are going through the same thing. So when I speak, I try to speak for them as well as myself, and saying, hey, there's outlining other issues that also damage veterans a little bit more than other citizens, because we do have those benefits, which I think that they are more highly coveted and targeted, because those are benefits that it's not a loan. It's not something they're not on the hook for it. When Argosy closed, and their CEOs and their C-level organization, they got away with that, and those are benefits that I'll never get back again,
Definitely. And it just seems like I think the phrase to say is the trust has been broken, which is, just to borrow something Tasha has said, you trusted them, you basically gave your life, and you did not expect this to happen. And this is something that multiple stakeholders are involved. So I just want to pick up on that point. And before this question, we'll go to Q&A in a bit. But Jesse and David, I wanted to ask you, just following up on this, when did you, Jesse, when did you realize that the school that you were attending was a fraud? When did you feel that was that tipping point when you realized this is really unbelievable? And for David, what are some red flags that people should keep aware of?
Yeah, so as Kendrick and Tasha were kind of talking about their initiation period, I got accepted under a not-for-profit school. So I barely got accepted to my art academy because, for 29 years, it was a prestigious art school to go to, and they wanted top artists. And I was a good artist, but not amazing. So when I got accepted, I was totally thrilled. After the sale, I started noticing weird things. Professors that had been there for 29 years were being asked to retire or forced to accept their pension and going to teach at Columbia. And then I also started noticing that because I was an older student and my professors, talked to me as an adult as well. So they would start informing me that some of the new recruits that were coming in the first years and stuff didn't seem to have the artistic ability that would help them succeed within 4 years of obtaining their degree, that they really weren't qualified to necessarily be at the art school because they just weren't up to par, unfortunately. And then we started noticing changes within the attendance. We used to have a very strict attendance policy where you could not miss no more than a certain couple days. If you were tardy, you were absent after half an hour. When the new school started arriving, it seemed like they were going for the no one gets left behind policy, which in college is not very good a policy to accept, I feel, because you want to challenge your students to be successful so they can be successful in the fields they're going for employment with. And I just noticed that the teachers were being forced to pass students that weren't following the curriculum, that were showing up for the last 5 minutes of class. They were being accepted as a full day instead of being tardy or being absent. And my teachers were frustrated because, they're teaching an hour and a half, 2 hours, and this person walks in the last 5 minutes and they have to say they were there. And so that's when I kind of started noticing that the fall of the school was beginning to happen and it wasn't going to end well. And then, as I said, when we came back I came back for my last 11 weeks, prior to my graduation ceremony, they were still accepting new students, even foreign exchange students, under an accredited institute. So, when I show up for my last 11 weeks, their first time in the country, their first time in the state, they're being told that they have literally until December to find new colleges, or their visas are not going to be accepted anymore in the country, or they're going to have to go back to their home states and just try something else. And as I said, for me, I just found out my last 4 years was worthless. And if I wanted to continue my education, which 6 months of unaccreditation turned into 2.5 years to try to attain an actual bachelor's. And at my age, being a single mom, I just can't afford to commit that time any further. I have to have a job. I have to be able to provide for my family.
Doing it over is it's not an option for a lot of people, because first of all, you have to pay so much more money again, lost all your benefits, and it's just, again, the trust is just broken. So David, I just want to throw a final question to you before I saw a question in the Q&A box, but what are some of the red flags that you've started noticing, unusual red flags, if you will, of predatory schools?
Well, I think that whole aggressive marketing, where you get, I think Tasha may have had this experience where you get called repeatedly, you get emailed repeatedly. That in and of itself, in some respects, is a potential warning sign that the school is spending a lot more effort marketing itself than it is making sure it has a sound instructional program and is doing a good job of placing students in jobs in their fields of training. For-profit schools or career schools are, they're not like liberal arts colleges. They're not like research universities. Their sole purpose is to train you for a job in your field of study and to place you in that job. It's very hard to, it's easy to say this in retrospect, but what I would encourage people to look out for as red flags is, one is this sort of very aggressive marketing. Two is do some independent research on the school before you actually apply, because you are, as Kendrick said, you're using your precious, for veterans in particular, you're using precious earned benefits that you are basically very unlikely to ever be able to use again, and they're worth tens of thousands of dollars. So just do a Google search. Are there any complaints about this school? Are there any criticisms that it's used predatory marketing or has a lousy placement rate? And then go on the school website, because there is, and go on what's known as this college scorecard website, because you should be able to find some data there that talks about the earnings of graduates of those programs, the loan debt of graduates of those programs, and you should be able to get at least a little bit of information and an independent assessment of whether this is a good school or not such a good school. And finally, you can't always do this, but you can use the college scorecard to compare different schools. But I would say in general, look first at community college programs. There are lots of places where the community college program you want is not available, but community college programs are invariably cheaper, substantially cheaper than a for-profit school. So, even if you decide you don't want to be in a community college setting, you want to be with older students, you want to be with more non-traditional students, at least give the community college a look, because they're much cheaper and you'll never end up in that kind of desperate debt that we're hearing today in some of these students' stories. I mean, $100,000 of debt is a lot of debt. And as Tasha was saying, I don't know, she doesn't know, I think, how she's going to pay it off. And you could hear in Kendrick's voice and Sasha's story how much that debt weighs on them, how much it weighs on their lives day after day, year after year.
So, sorry, go ahead, Kendrick.
Oh, if I could, I just wanted to piggyback off of what David said. Another good resource, especially if you're looking if they're looking to join or sign up for college, use the VSOs. I mean, a lot of these veteran service organizations like VES, they have a wealth of information, not just for veterans, but for everyday citizens. I mean, if we get the word out that, hey, you know, if a regular citizen, I know me as a veteran, I didn't know they existed, you know, until everything happened. But had I known prior and you know, got a chance to sit down and talk with them and say, hey, what is the industry like, you know, and let's get more information out there. I think it would have helped me make a much better decision. So my suggestion would just be, hey, make sure you tap into like these VSOs. VES, like I said, they're phenomenal. Their staff is excellent. Carrie Walford, she does an excellent job from top to bottom with the legislation. So they can actually help and point a lot of, you know, students in the right direction if they were used as that resource.
So I am very mindful that we are 5 minutes over, but I do want to ask this last question, if you don't mind, Raymond, just on the borrower defense process and you know, how you think that's been going. Because the question says, aren't the student loans of students who have been misled by for-profit colleges canceled? And the answer is, I don't think that's an easy question to answer. So I just wanted to give you guys a quick opportunity to respond to that question, and then maybe we can wrap up.
Well, my student loans were not canceled. Actually, I filed my borrower's defense claim when Betsy DeVos and the Trump administration were in, and it was flat out denied. They said that I failed to provide sufficient evidence or state a legal claim when I had the very best attorneys, you know, help me craft it and submit the evidence. So, you know, as far as the borrower's defense claims, those were being rejected. I know the new administration is more favorable in it, but mine's were not. I have to seek through other means to get my loans discharged.
Jesse, Tasha, you want to weigh in?
Mine were also not canceled. Like I said, I started my borrower defense application, I want to say the end of 2018, and it's still pending. I just get notifications every couple months that it's just still in the pending process, but they are not canceled. They still accumulate interest and thus forward. So I'm still just in limbo. I don't know if it's going to get approved or not.
My lawyer filed on the behalf of us for borrower's defense, and it is still pending. The only portions of my loan that got canceled were during the loss of accreditation from December 2018 until I graduated, which for as little classes as I had during those final portions of my education, I really did not get that much canceled. But, you know, as far as the other students that started and whatever during that time, they did get their loans forgiven, and that was awesome. But as I said, we're still fighting to get the rest of our loans forgiven for all the degrees that ended up being worthless after the sale of the school.
I do know that I think it's a certain year frame, like I think 2017 to 2019 or 20, those veterans, they tend to get their loans forgiven, but anything beyond, like I graduated in 2010, there's nothing that's helping us right now. Wow. And that's why we're really trying to fight for this, because we all have degrees that we just can't use. They're no good.
There are tens of thousands of students who attended Corinthian and mostly Corinthian colleges who have gotten their loans or at least part of the loans forgiven. The Obama administration forgave their loans and completely. The Trump administration was very miserly about how much relief they could give to people. But even in cases where the government, the federal government or a state government has determined that students were defrauded, it's still very, very difficult to get any kind of borrower relief, much less full relief. So this is a real problem, and it's a problem for hundreds of thousands of students and of defrauded students. And it was a problem that was made much worse by the Trump administration.
And on that note, David, I'd like to hand the reins of this webinar back to you for final thoughts.
Okay, thank you. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, who listened in, and particularly give a shout out to Artie and Kendrick and Jesse and Tasha. If you want to learn more about this history, please think about ordering a copy of the book. It's called The Prophets of Failure, and you can find it on Amazon. But for now, I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for listening in today, and thanks for your commitment to tackling these issues.